So on Sunday, you wore the Flyers jersey that someone in the church surprised you with because you had mentioned it in a message that's something you wanted since you were a high schooler. So this question is kind of based on that. In your life, what's the type of gift that really connects to you, that like touches your heart, that you value? If you have an example, you can give one, but if just more in general.
So anytime somebody has taken the time to think about something that would be important to me, so like they've taken the time to research, like, oh, I think Chris would really like this. Mm-hmm. That is the most important gift to me ever. Like, and so like I've gotten gifts throughout my life that I would say like are material things that they wear out. But the fact that somebody took the time to think about me, they took the effort to go and get me the gift, and then have given it to, like, they thought of me, like, that is the most important thing to me. So like even the hockey jersey, like, that's huge. Like, somebody took the time and effort to do something special for me because they cared about me and wanted to bless me. Like, that's huge. Yeah. And so like I've had all kinds of gifts like that throughout my life. So there's a lot of important things to me. But
yeah, I would totally agree. I think if a gift is very specific to my personality, like you're saying, if someone gave it thought, if there's sacrifice to it, for them to get it for me, I really appreciate that. Yeah. You know, yeah, I mean, like, I know, and that's even how you are as a gift giver. I know you like to make things a lot of times to add that extra level of care and intentionality to it. So I know at Christmas time, did you get all the things done you wanted to? I know at Christmas time you were like working hard, putting in some overtime to get it all done.
Yeah, I ended up being able to make, so I do like leather craft stuff, and I was able to make, I got a journal thing done for Elijah. He had asked for one. And then like I did a guitar strap for Abigail. Hannah, I remade a wallet that she wanted, and Cassie had been asking for a tote bag for years and was able to get that done.
That's super cool. Yeah, I bought some stuff for my family on eBay. No, I'm just kidding. eBay. I meant to say Amazon. It came out eBay. I'm like, I haven't bought anything on eBay in a long time.
Sweet still.
Yeah. Well, welcome everyone to the Branch Podcast, where we sit down every week and we talk theology. And oftentimes it has to do with the previous Sunday's message, where we hope that we can talk about it in such a way that makes it more understandable and more applicable to your life. And so typically it's me, Chris, and Anthony. Anthony is out sick this week, so it's going to be Chris and I having a discussion. And that works because Chris was the one who taught this past Sunday. So Chris, real quick, can you give us just a brief summary of the teaching from Sunday, just in case someone hasn't watched it yet, so they can get a little bit of context, and then we'll have a discussion.
Sure. So essentially I taught the idea that God desires to be the provision for our needs. And so basing that out of the idea that God invites us into a relationship, and within the context of that relationship, he is the one that we are to look to provide the needs, from the most basic, because we'll see God provide food for the Israelites, to the most the deepest needs of our heart, the need to belong, the need to feel loved, the need to have security and peace and wholeness, a sense of wholeness. God designed us to find all of those things in Him. And so we talked about the importance of, and we looked at the story of Jairus, Jairus' daughter who had passed away. He was the synagogue ruler. And we looked at the woman who had the issue of blood. And just talking about the idea how for us to come to the place where we depend on God that way, we have to allow ourselves to be desperate for Him, and to use the desperate moments to kind of rid ourselves of like our self-sufficiency. And then also we have to be willing to be vulnerable and put ourselves in a place where we risk ourselves, not risk ourselves, but we essentially risk betting on God to come through for us. And so the idea of like, we have to take steps of faith. And then I just gave like the last 5 points of the message were reasons why that's a safe bet, and why Jesus demonstrated that He was faithful to these people in the story, but also to us.
All right. So later on in our talk, if I don't come back to your point about risk, remind me.
Okay.
I don't want to do it right now because I think we need to set some foundation before we get there.
Sure.
But it was something. So I listened to your message this morning on the day that we recorded this, because I was gone on Sunday, and listened to it while I was working out. And you made this point. I was doing incline bench. I don't know why I remember that, but I was like pushing up as you said the point about risk, and I was like, I want to talk to Chris about that later, because there is a tension there in my own mind and heart. So just remind me later.
Sure.
All right. One of the things I loved in the message, especially you did in the beginning, you were introducing the idea or reminding people that God wants to be in a relationship with us.
Yeah.
And that is one of the things that I think most often people that are either new to the faith or even from some other faith backgrounds is I think I say this not to throw shade at anyone, but I think a lot of churches don't emphasize the relational aspect of God.
Yeah.
God, they kind of simplify God down to rules. And so God has all these commands and these expectations. And if you don't follow them, then he's mad at you. It's like that kind of that bent, even though they might not define it that way. We hear it often when people come to our church that they're like, man, you guys talk about God in such a relational way.
Yeah.
And even you specifically made the comment about the covenant relationship, that God is basically contractually obligating himself to us in the sense of that's what, there was an old covenant, but the new covenant with Jesus was him dying on the cross for our sins so that we could be in this relationship. And it comes with God's promises. Let me just ask two questions, and I'd love to hear your insight on it. Why do you need that as the foundation of understanding God? Why does it have to come through relationship? Because why can it not come through just simply like a normal paper contract where it's going to be, I do A, B is going to happen? Why do we need to understand God relationally?
So how nerdy do you want me to get? So
answer the question the best you're able.
All right. So like if you look at the way that the systems of religion that Israel came out of, and so I'm gonna give a long answer here. You see how the other nations treated and reacted to and interacted with the gods that they would say were their gods.
Right.
And so like there was always this idea that there are gods, and I realize I'm stemming into like some things that might be weird for people, but so the Egyptians believed that they had gods that were over their nation and they paid homage to, or they would pay tribute to, so that things would go their way.
Right.
And so like if you have this mindset of God is someone in heaven who's disinterested with you and only wants you for a certain reason, you have to pay tribute to him to appease him so that nothing bad happens in your life.
Right, and they would have very specific things. They would have a sun god so that the sun would shine over their crops.
Right.
They would have fertility god. I mean, like multiple levels. And other nations would have the same thing.
Yeah. And so when God calls his people out of the land of Egypt, they're coming out of where they witnessed that type of religion their entire lives. And then they come to this place where God goes, okay, so that is they are tied to these gods. God says, I'm going to be your God. He says, but we're not going to operate the way that they do. I'm going to commit myself to you, and I'm going to make you my people. I'm going to claim you as my people, and then I'm going to be your God. So I'll be the one who comes through for you. I'll be the one that you look to for provision. And so when everybody else is if you look at these ancient stories and people say that gods are the same, they're not. They're enslaving humans. They're using humans for all these nefarious purpose. And God comes along and says, I want to be in relationship with you. I want to know you. I want to be active in your life. And so this is something unique that God is doing with the Israelites. And it really sets the foundation for how we are to think about him. And so he does set rules. He does set structure for the relationship, the idea of the covenant. Right. But that is all shaped around the idea that first and foremost, that I am the Lord your God who rescued you. Yeah. I came for you. I want to be in relationship with you. I want to exist in this way. And if we think about relationships, what good relationship, how good is a relationship, I should say, without that structure? And so he's not a God of laws for the purpose of having laws. He's a God of laws because that is how our lives flourish and how the relationship flourishes when we obey the things that he lays out before us. And I don't mean the law strictly, even thinking about like coming into the New Testament, but it creates a structure for like, these are the expectations for what a healthy relationship with God looks like. And so without that, the relationship would be dysfunctional.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in my own mind, I think about like a person who has a job in, say, a corporate setting or a factory where they have a boss, but they wouldn't necessarily say they're in a relationship with that boss.
Right.
That relationship and that interaction is going to be different than hopefully their relationship with their spouse.
Right.
The spouse is this covenant relationship, a commitment to each other. You've pledged yourself to each other in the marriage covenant. And so you're going to operate differently. And so you're going to have You're going to receive more from it. You're going to give more to it. There's trust even in the mystery.
Yeah.
You give hopefully your spouse the benefit of the doubt. Your boss, you just don't have that dynamic.
Sure.
So it's like, is God saying, I want that intimate relationship. I want that connection. I don't want to simply be a boss. Because he could have been that.
Yes.
I mean, let's be honest. And he could have been justified to just demand of us, but he chose not to do that.
Right.
All right. So here's my second follow-up to that then. If God made a covenant relationship with us and we know he's there, a lot of times people will say God feels distant.
Mm-hmm.
I think even you and I, who have been, I would say, faithful followers of God for a long time, have gone through seasons where he just didn't feel as close as he was in other seasons. Why is that? Because I think a lot of people just kind of naturally go to either fear that they've done something wrong, or even I think some people can get somewhat jaded, disillusioned to God, because it feels like you did make these promises, and I don't see you actively moving in my situation. I don't actively feel your presence. And so there's that tension. And I know, like on Sunday you were talking about in desperation, run to God, but like, let's just talk about in the covenant side of it. Why is it that sometimes God feels distant? Because the truth of it is it could be our fault too, but like, what are the dynamics? How should someone process that?
I was just going to say, I think there can be a lot of different reasons for why God can feel distant. It could be something that we have distanced ourselves from God. Like we've stopped doing the things that connect us to God. So we're not reading our scripture. We're not going to church. We're not doing Bible study, spending time in prayer. All of these things really foster the relationship with God and put us in a place where we can experience God's presence. So we might be pulling back on that, and that could be causing distance. There's 1,000 reasons why we might be doing that. We might feel shame for sin that we're going through. But so that's one reason that we could be doing it. The other reason is we could simply be tired and hungry. I mean, you know what I mean? Like we are physical beings that have physical needs. And so sometimes we just don't have the energy and the strength to connect to God the way that he deserves to be connected to. You know what I mean? And so it could be us in that, but not as a fault of our own, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, for sure it does.
So like it could be something as simple as like we need to take a nap and take a day off and
have a Snickers bar.
Yeah, and have a Snickers bar, right? So like it could be as simple as that. Or it could be the fact that as human beings, our hearts go in 1,000 different directions and our hearts tie to a lot of different things. And so sometimes we are allowing our hearts to be pulled in other directions. And so we start chasing after our hobbies, or we start chasing after our careers, or we start chasing after these other things. And that can make us feel, when those things become the priority of our lives, it can make us feel distant from God, I think, in those seasons. But then I think there is the very real reality that at times God goes quiet, not because he's not loving. And I can honestly say, I don't know why that is, but I just know that I've experienced times when I feel like I'm doing all the right things, and yet God still feels far. And maybe there's a reason that I've missed or that I don't understand. But I do think we see good precedent for the fact that there are seasons of testing, there are seasons of difficulty, there are seasons of things that we don't understand. And God allows us to experience that, not because he's abandoned us, but because he has a reason for doing it, and we don't understand it.
Yeah, today in my own devotions, I'm in Numbers, and I was reading when God had the nation of Israel, create the tabernacle, which is a portable temple where God's presence would be. God tells them, he says, whenever my presence rises, that's when you all pack up camp, and then when my presence moves, and during the day it would be a cloud, at night it would be a pillar of fire. And whenever his presence moved, they would just follow his presence. And it literally says in there, like, when his presence stopped, they had to set up camp. And sometimes that was for the night, sometimes that was for days, sometimes that was for months.
Right.
And I think even initially at Mount Sinai, it was for 2 years. And that God's presence, and I highlighted like the whole section in my Bible because I thought, what a beautiful reality that this is how we're supposed to live, is that when God's moving, we follow, but at times God's like, chill, stay still.
Yeah.
And I almost wonder that sometimes with the silence is, I think we put an expectation on God, like, you take me somewhere else, do something right now. And God's going, my presence has stopped, not in the sense of giving up, but I'm here. Let's just chill. Let's relax and be okay with knowing I have made that covenant relationship. I promise to be in relationship with you. So I'm here, but you just need to not run ahead of me.
I think that's huge because, so I've got an 18-year-old son, and he's figuring out what it means to live an adult life.
Yeah, it's
and
tough.
I think some of the hardest things for him are just the normalcy of life.
Yeah, right. Because high school is like
Yeah.
from one high to another.
Yeah,
right?
it's one high to another. And I think we get that expectation with God
Yeah.
sometimes of God is just going to take us from one mountaintop to the next mountaintop. And there are a lot of seasons of walking through, like to use the biblical imagery, there's a lot of seasons of walking through the desert. There's a lot of seasons of just doing normal life with God, always with the seeking him in a way that goes, God, are you saying something to me today? Do you want to do something today? God, I want to connect with you. I want, and some days it's just quiet, and you continue to do the things that you're supposed to do to foster that relationship, trusting and believing, like you said, that God, he's still there. He's still moving. It just is not the way that we expected it.
Yeah. Okay. So in our relation with God, on Sunday, you were talking about these two individuals that get to a place of desperation.
Sure.
And so like somewhat of a last ditch effort, they go to Jesus. Obviously, prior to Jesus, they would have had no other options. Like they might have just stayed in their situation. The woman who had the issue of bleeding, she tried a bunch of things for like 12 years. Jairus' daughter just happened to die in that season, so that was his season of urgency. Why does God allow us to get to a place of desperation? Why does he use desperation? And I would say even like the flip side of that is, why is self-sufficiency a bad thing? You know what I mean? So why is desperation sometimes a good thing? Why is self-sufficiency sometimes a bad thing? Because in our culture, I've heard Jesus' culture referred to an upside down kingdom.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, so like our kingdom here on earth, those things are celebrated. Self-sufficiency is celebrated.
Right.
Being in desperation is not. Having security is celebrated. So why is God economy? Why does he use that? Because honestly, it can feel like, to a person who's not a believer and is just like maybe thinking about Christianity, that can almost feel like a mean form of manipulation.
Sure.
To put someone in a place of desperation, you would think, man, I don't know that it would be healthy if a parent did that. I mean, like, so you just talked about your son.
Yeah.
You're not intentionally trying to put him in positions of desperation.
Right.
I'm not doing that with my kids. So why does God allow that?
I honestly, I wrestled with that whenever I was thinking about the points that I wanted to kind of talk about. And I had that thought. I'm like, man, why does God have to bring us to this moment of like utter dependency on him to get us to actually like love him and depend on him? And I would say that a lot of that is not necessarily God, it's us. And we are so attached to our own ability to be the gods of our lives, that those are the moments that get us to the place where we can finally open our eyes. One of the things that I often do whenever I'm doing a funeral service, I always want to share the gospel message when I'm at a funeral service. That can feel manipulative, and it is not. But the reality is, when we're sitting at the casket of a loved one, we are desperately aware of something that we forget about most of the rest of our days. It's the fact that at one point we're all going to be in that space.
Yeah.
And if we don't take time to think about that in our lives, we can live our lives and just keep going about our day like everything is just going to keep being okay. And until we get to this moment of like, oh, that's an illusion. This is reality. This is what awaits us. And so like I think God uses these moments to wake us up from this illusion that we're able to handle life ourselves. And so that's what I try to kind of get to on Sunday, was this idea that like if we think that we have control of our lives, like just give it time, and we'll come to the understanding that this world is way bigger than us. It's more overwhelming than we can handle. And if you look at really the thing that was such a hindrance from the very beginning, the thing that caused all of the problems that we know as the problems of our world, if you look at Adam and Eve in their initial relationship with God, his promise to them was, I will provide everything that you need if you will trust me. And so in that moment, they decide God's not trustworthy, and so they think they have to handle it themselves. Well, every time we act out of our self-sufficiency, and I'm not talking about like using the gifts that God gives us. I'm not talking about even like the fact that we're able to go to the grocery store, the fact that we have jobs that provide finances for us. I'm not saying that that's not like a level of sufficiency, self-sufficiency that we can operate out of. It's more so the attitude of, I don't need God to be the one to come through for me. I can handle it myself. I can find a way. I'll make it happen. That way I don't have to submit to all of the other things that God asked me to do. And so that would be a better definition for me of self-sufficiency. And that is dangerous because that will always keep us away from God.
Right.
And so like God will take those desperate moments and give us those really clarity into the reality of our weakness, of our brokenness, of who we are, and allow us to see for a moment, we might need something greater than ourselves to truly find life.
Yeah. So I'm about to share something personal for you, but you shared it in your sermon.
Sure,
So
yeah.
I'm not like violating the trust here, just in case people didn't listen to the sermon. I really appreciated your vulnerability and transparency on Sunday, acknowledging that you've had a battle from in the past of anxiety to in a season panic attacks to even anxiety that you still battle. So you're a faithful follower of Jesus. You have those disciplines in your life. I mean, you're consistently in studying scripture, you're praying, you're worshiping, you're living an overcoming life. I mean, with the power of the Spirit of God in your life. And yet you still have those things. And so that has taught you a level of desperation. Can you just share a little bit more about, though you've learned so much from it, it's also been, as Paul would describe it using spiritual language here, a thorn in the flesh.
Yeah.
That there is a side of it that you celebrate, and there's a side of it that you wish you didn't have. Because I think it's good for people. Like when you were saying those things, I was so touched by it, even knowing your story. I mean, you and I have been friends for a long, long time. And I've walked with you through some of that, but even knowing your story, like hearing you talk about it and using some phrases that maybe I haven't heard you use before, it made my heart be really compassionate toward you, because I was like, man, that's a difficult tension that you live in of all the things I just said. On one hand, totally trusting God, but on the other hand, really frustrated by this condition. So can you just share, like, how have you navigated that? What are the feelings that you've had? How have you processed that?
Sure.
How did it become a positive while you still hate it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, because I think that's what people think, like, I have to get to the place where I have victory and or it's of my past, or I just simply have to suffer in it. And you were saying, I don't love it, but it's producing something good in my life.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was a lot of that God taught me out of that season, and I'll go into some of the details of it here a little bit. But like a lot of what God taught me out of that situation, and really the state of my life is the idea that there's this expectation that when we think that we're mature believers, that we're going to become more self-sufficient, that we're going to, if I was a better Christian, I would not be dealing with what I'm dealing with right now.
Right.
If I was more mature, then I would be better at doing ministry. If I was, and we keep looking for this silver bullet to fix like all of these things, and we keep looking for the one thing that's wrong, that's keeping us from accomplishing the things or being the person or doing the things that we want to do. And what this season did for me was it broke off that illusion, that illusion essentially. And it is coming to the place where like I'm not happy that I still have to deal with anxiety, but what I've learned in it is that God is faithful in it, and God will use me in spite of it. And so it's just I've come to the realization that it's just some of it is the way that God made, like maybe it's my hardwiring, maybe it's the way God made me, maybe it's just a broken part of me that God will eventually like redeem in full. But what I can look at, my perspective for it now is like I can go, man, God is using this to increase my dependence and my trust of Him. And so I have to wake up every day, feel anxious about something, and trust that I'm okay. God's going to take care of me. I can miss out on some, and a lot of the ways that I will wrestle with it is like, if I was not anxious, then I would be better at being a husband. If I was not anxious, I'd be better at being a father. If I wasn't anxious, I'd be better at being a pastor and being a better friend. And like, that is the thing that I have to wrestle and trust God with every single day. There's a lot of times that, and I didn't share this example, but I've had so many conversations where I've sat down with Pastor Brandon and Pastor Phil, and even you sometimes, and like, you have to remind me that I'm okay. Like, because my mind is going 1,000 different ways with the ways that I've failed, and I'm anxious about the like things I've dropped the ball on, and like the fact that I'm still human frustrates me.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But it's when like the reassurance of you guys just taking time to go, has anybody said that you're failing? Has anybody said that you're like, you have to come to the place where you realize like you're still human, and being human means that we're dependent on God. And I've come to find that to be a beautiful thing. So
All right,
I hope I answered your question.
You did.
Like,
So even with that, okay, so prior to that answer, you were talking before, and you were saying it's possible that some of the times where God feels distance because of behaviors in our lives, whether it's neglect of doing things that would cause him to feel close, or it could be sinful things in our lives. But then also in your situation, your anxiety is not necessarily always based on facts, in the sense of you're not dropping the ball, you're crushing it as a leader. From our perspective, you don't have like hidden sin in your life. So if this whole rhythm of life, and even how God interacts in this covenant relationship, if it's so unpredictable, how does a person know if what they're feeling is correction from God? It's God redirecting their path. It's God testing their faith. It's God asking them to stand still. How can they know those things or have confidence in those things?
Spend time with God and ask him, God, am I missing something here? Have I sinned against you, or have I sinned against somebody and I've not dealt with it? Is there something going on in my heart that, am I chasing after a value that's not from you? I do that all the time. Like, God, am I valuing something more than I should here? Particularly with like, I get in this, I want to be successful in life, and I want to do the best I can. And this stems into some of the anxiety. But so like, I've got to stop and ask God, like, is this me wanting to do something for your glory? Or is this me trying to bite into the values of, I've got to be successful to be of any worth in life? You know what I'm saying? So like, spending time with God really helps clarify some of those things. And there's been seasons in my life where it's been, Chris, you're okay. Like just settle into this. Like, and this was, I started grad school probably about 5 years ago now. And like, a lot of what God spoke to me through this season is just do the things. Like, it was a season of like, we're not working on anything new here. Like, this is, you do what you've been called to do and be faithful in it, and just kind of depend on me in that season of, we're just going to do life together, because honestly, there was enough on my plate, you know what I'm saying? And God led me to that place. So I trust God in that moment. But it's unnerving to be in that space and be like, God, are you trying to show me this? Are you trying to show me this? Is there something new? Like, what's going on? And God just keeps coming back and going, no, like, just settle into that. But then there's been seasons where this has been like one of my most transformative years, where God has shown me and really released me through a lot of insecurity, because, and a lot of it has been like entrusting my dreams, my visions, my goal, like vision for my life and my goals to him, and not having to, being okay to be human, for lack of better terms. Like, I don't have to get better at something to belong. And so like, God has shown me all of that and has transformed all of that through my time with him, but also through other people and through friends and through trusted people that I have very honest conversations with. I sit down every week with Pastor Brandon, and he asks me how I'm doing. And I say, man, I'm sucking. This is why. And I tell him honestly the thoughts that are going through my head. And like, that has been the most freeing thing, because it's that moment where he goes, have I told you that you're failing? And he's like, and I'm like, no. And I get frustrated by it. I'm like, Brandon, we do this every single week. He's like, you haven't gotten it yet. So like, but like, what it does is it releases that place where Satan will go in and ruminate and like kind of dig at me, where I will be dug at, and what would drive insecurity now loses its power. And so I've got God leading me, and I'm trusting that. and now I'm entrusting myself to fellow believers who I know have my best interest at heart, and I'm learning to trust is essentially what it is. So
this is a topic we talk about all the time, but I want to even freshly address it in the podcast. You use the phrase "spend time with God." That, in my opinion, is both being proactive for doing specific things to get into the presence of God, but I think it's also being proactive in removing things that can hinder the presence of God.
Sure.
I'll give a simple example, but then I want you to just speak for what it looks like in your life. I think people, like, I'll hear people at times talk about, I just want peace in my life, but I suffer from feeling fear and anxiousness. And then you hear that they love listening to murder podcasts, like murder mystery and stuff. And you're like, I see a connection. You know what I mean? So like you would say in one sense, like, let's remove some of those things, the stuff that you're letting in. But then we would also say, let's add some proactive things to do that. So when we talk about being in the presence of God, I think for some people, they might have an incorrect viewpoint that pastors somehow have like a secret portal to connect to God, when there's an intentionality to it for us. So what does that look like? So what does that look like for someone like you to connect to the presence of God? What are the things that you have to be purposed to add? What are the things that you have to be purposed to remove so that you can truly hear from him? Because I think we are in a culture that has taught us to remove margin. And so some of it is just the simple busyness of life. Some of it is even specific things that we allow our hearts to be drawn to. But can you speak to that for a moment?
You hit it for me. The things that I have to be super careful of is I like to do things. I like to live life. I like to experience things. So I will fill my schedule to the brim if I can.
Right.
And so I have to be super purposed, not to create the margin to have time to spend with God. And I love that it's the priority of our staff here. And so I do feel like I'm privileged in a way that it's talked about, it's given space for in my work environment as well as my home environment. And so I feel like that's a privileged thing that I get to be a part of. But it is that it's being purposed to set that time, that margin aside to connect with him, to spend time reading scripture. I get up every day and I read a psalm, and I typically pray through that psalm, like God, what are you stirring in my heart here? And then I also read, I just pick a book of the Bible and I just filter through it chapter at a time, typically. And that's typically my morning time. And God speaks to me through those times. And so I've got to be super purposed to take time to do those things. The other part of it is not allowing myself to gravitate too much to back to that rhythm of like, I just need to get up and go and get about my day. That is the greatest temptation for me, is like, I wake up and I want to go. And so like, I've been super purposed to say, no, I'm gonna sit, I'm gonna be quiet. I'm gonna pray through the psalm. I'm gonna talk to God about the things. And I'm terrible with lists. So like, I just don't do prayer lists well. So I just start with, God, who am I praying for today? Like, what do you want to stir my heart? Who do you want to stir my heart towards? And how can I be praying for them today? And so like, just asking God to lead me in that. And that was even an expectation that like I had to kind of let myself go of, because I fought for years. I'm like, why am I so terrible at this? Right. But like it was coming to the place where like, I realized God designed me this way. And so like, I'm still seeking God for other people, and God's been faithful and always brings people to my mind when I ask him. So I hope I answered your question. I felt like I got on a side there towards the end. What about for you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think there's a way that I view this. I don't view this in a legalistic way. I think when I make God a priority, he honors that. So I have a conviction in my own heart of, I want to spend time with God before anything else. I don't literally mean that. I think I've talked about this before. I don't literally mean that as the first thing where I get out of bed and I have to enter into the presence of God right there. When I first wake up, I'm probably like most people. It's going to take me a minute to get my head going. So my normal rhythm is I wake up and I get dressed to go work out. I drive to the gym. On the way to the gym, that's when I really begin just saying to God. I literally, as cheesy as it might sound, I'd say good morning to God. I'd say good morning, like, thank you, God. And I just start talking to him. Thank you for another good day. And I'll share what I'm going on in my own heart. And I ask him, like, basically from that point forward, will you just guide me today? Will you speak to me today? I go and I work out, oftentimes listening to worship music. Today I listened to a great sermon, your sermon, while I lifted weights. And then afterwards, I go to my office and I spend time in the Word. Today I was going through Numbers, and it was shockingly enjoyable. Like some of those books can get kind of redundant, but I really enjoyed the part I was in. And then whenever I read, I pray that. So like whatever truth that popped out of the scriptures, whether it's someone's failure or it's someone's success. If it's someone's failure, I go, God, man, protect me from that. Help me not to ever go down that pathway. If it's someone's success, I say, God, help me to mimic that. Help me to make you a priority, those kind of types of things. And then throughout the day, I just want to consistently put myself in positions to be sensitive to God, from whether it be more prayer or if I'm working at my desk, having worship music going. And I don't want to sound like hyper spiritual in the sense of like I have to create this, this ambiance all day. There's just an intentionality to it though, because I'm doing spiritual things. I'm having to make decisions for the church, and I need a constant, like this is a prayer we pray all the time as a staff. Help us to align with your Spirit's heart. Like we want to do what your Spirit wants us to do. Yeah. And so like all day long, it's like that rhythm. But then I also have to be very purpose. I think social media is one of the most damaging things to our minds and hearts. And I think it's also one of the biggest waste of time and distractors of time. And so I got social media off my phone. It's still on my computer, and I need it because I do need Facebook to make connections through the church and things like that. I gotta be honest, I hate Facebook. I hate the division. I hate right now that politics is like lighting up my feed. Yeah. But I have Instagram on my computer and stuff. But I've taken social media off because I find it doesn't lead my heart to good places. It doesn't lead me to the presence of God. I'm reading stuff and I'm judging people. I'm frustrated with people. And I don't love that. Yeah. And so like, it says more about me than it does anyone else. I'm not blaming someone else. I'm just saying like, that's the weakness of my heart. So, I can't watch, very foul shows. Mary and I have that conviction, but like, there were times in my past, I mean, even early on in ministry where I look back and think of some of the shows I watched through and enjoyed that if I tried to watch through now with all the language and stuff, I'd be like, oh, I can't do that. Yeah. And so, but that's come through years of realizing this stuff's going to impact me. I don't watch shows where there's adultery in the show. Mary and I are really purpose about that because it creates a tension in my mind that's not really there in my marriage. You know what I mean? Like there's like sensitive things like that. So again, to me, it's both sides. It's proactive to put stuff in. It's proactive to take stuff out or to block from stuff. And I think if people were more intentional about that, even starting your day, if you're driving to work, throwing on some worship music, having simple prayers at lunchtime, or if you have this rhythm, like putting on your headphones or AirPods at work and listening to some scripture, I think there's some simple things that would bring a lot of clarity to people's lives. And I think they would realize that God is speaking, God is guiding, and God is present. I think they would realize God's not as distant as sometimes he might feel. Yeah,
and I love how you said it, because like I think we go like, can I do this and still be close to God? And like, am I allowed to watch rated R movies, or should I not watch rated R movies? Does that inhibit? Like, can I? You mentioned the murder podcast. Yeah, my wife loves those. You know what I mean? So like, can I listen to that and still be connected to God? And I love the way that you mentioned it. Like, you have to be hypersensitive to. You've got to create the culture of your life to be sensitive to what the Spirit's doing in that moment, so that you can make those decisions. Because I don't think it's necessarily always one way or the other. And I think you said it, like, it hits you that way at times. And there are things like, you mentioned it so well. Like, I was just talking to somebody, I used to love like Adam Sandler movies and I think they're hilarious. Like, I'm more sensitive to those things now where like, I don't find them as funny as I used to. Right. And I will watch a show. There's shows that other people on staff recommend that like I think are perfectly fine for them to watch if they're in that space. But I start it and I go, I can't do this. Like this because the Spirit like speaks in that moment. And so being willing to say that God trumps, like being sensitive to the voice of the Spirit, and it trumps everything, because your greatest desire is to know and to connect with God. Mm-hmm. I think that's the safest place to live. As we think about it.
For sure. Yeah. I hope no one even hears like
and I didn't take it that way. I just wanted to.
Of legalism though, because that's not it. Because there's stuff that I watch that I'm sure there would be more sensitive people that would go, well, I wouldn't watch that.
Sure.
You know, I mean, like my wife is that way. So like if I watch a movie, like I'll give an example. We went and saw in the theater Quiet Place that like, I don't know how you describe it. It's like an alien thriller type movie, I guess. I don't know how it's not really an action movie, but anyways, if you've seen it, it's actually not very dirty in the sense of like, I don't think there's a ton of swearing or anything. There's no like sex or anything. But these aliens attack people. My wife basically did not watch the movie. She looked down the entire time and like, it was a lot for her. And it was funny to me. It didn't even hit on my radar. Like it was like, oh, this is good. I enjoyed it. And so there's some people have a hypersensitivity to certain things. For me, it's more about just the pulse of where my spirit is in this season. Because I'll even go through seasons where I cut out all TV and all movies, not because of legalism, because I think in this season, my heart's in a sensitive place or where I can just feel it. Like if I'm in a season where I've been hurt and so I'm battling anger or unforgiveness, I don't want to listen to a type of music that encourages it. I think some people want to like almost wallow in that. And I find like that's super unhealthy for me. So I don't want to watch violent TV shows and listen to violent music. I want to soothe. I want to, put myself in a position to win. So that's why I'm trying to be intentional about that. All right, a couple other quick questions.
Sure.
These aren't easy questions. So when I say quick, I don't mean it in short answers. All right, so the tension as you were teaching, I was feeling it in my own mind as a teacher, and I know you, and like in my mind I'm going, okay, here's the tension that I'm feeling, and I knew you were going to somewhat answer it a little bit, but it wasn't the direction of your message, and the tension was, you give these two powerful examples, Jairus and the woman with the issue of bleeding. They both meet Jesus, they both are healed, or his daughter's healed, she's healed. That's not everyone's reality.
Right.
In the specifics of what they're asking, that they experience that. You alluded to the story that's coming up in John the Baptist, which I was like, at that point in the message, I was on the treadmill and I was going, Chris, you're hitting my message the week after Easter. So like, slow down, buddy.
I knew it was coming up and I'm like, I just don't want to go any further than this.
It was just funny though, as you were saying it, I was like, easy. But anyway, the person who goes, okay, that my experience was I have in desperation run to Jesus. I haven't experienced the answer yet. What is that? Is that rejection? Is that God's perfect timing? Like how can someone process that?
Well, I think it goes back to my story in the way of like even thinking through like my anxiety. My anxiety is not gone. What I've learned is that in God's no, he's still present and he's still active in my life. He still loves me.
So there's a yes. It's a different yes than you've asked for.
Exactly. So I've asked for God to take that away. And what God has given me is an opportunity to be more dependent on him. And I just didn't have the time to do it. I almost brought the story of Paul in when he asked for his thorn in the flesh to be removed. And Jesus essentially tells him, he's like, no, my grace is sufficient for you because my power is made perfect in your weakness. So like, I think about that in the context of my story and I go like, what if this thing that I have to endure, what if it is the thing that keeps me connected to God and keeps me from becoming self-sufficient? I would not trade my anxiety for one lick of freedom from it in its entirety. If it's the thing that keeps me in a place where I'm dependent on him, if it's the thing that keeps me in a place where I see him work to greater degrees than even I would even function in my own power, my own strength, then I want it. You know what I mean? And so like, that's not God abandoning me. Right. That's God showing me something different and working in a different way in my life. And so I think when we think about the struggles of our lives and we go to God and we say, God, will you please fix this? I think there is a level of like, there are times when God's going to go, absolutely. And he heals, he does the miracle. It's not because, well, I'll get to there in just a second, but so he heals, he does the miracle, and he does this supernatural thing. I've experienced those things. Then there's times when he says, not now. And I've experienced those moments, but then there's times when he says, no, but I'll sustain you and I'll be with you in it. And I think, as we look at our struggles, we go, why doesn't God take this away? Why doesn't God provide what he told me he would provide, or what I feel like, what I expect he should provide? And coming to that place when we can allow our struggles and our suffering and our our disappointment to become things that draw us closer to God and make us more dependent on God. I think it's the way that we're left to live this life on earth in this broken world. It is where we find that God really does truly come through for us. When we can learn to set in our heartache, our heartbreak, and our struggle, and still trust and believe that God is going to be good and faithful in those moments.
Yeah, I think I've said oftentimes that sometimes people make apologies for God that he's not asking for.
Sure.
When they try to explain away some tough scriptures and they try to like almost sugarcoat it and put a spin on it. But the truth of it is, in Scripture, we have accounts like Jairus and his daughter. We have the woman with the issue of bleeding, but we do have the John the Baptist, and we do have the Pauls. Yeah. So we have two, John the Baptist and Paul, men of God.
And Jesus himself.
Who came to Jesus, and Jesus himself, but they came to Jesus and asked him to move on their behalf. And Jesus, to their specifics of their request, he said no.
Yeah.
John the Baptist was not released from prison,
right,
and Paul did not have the thorn in his flesh removed. And then you're right, Jesus himself went to the Father and said, if there's any other way for this cup to pass from me, but ultimately not my will, but yours be done. And the Father had to say no to that request because there was a greater good.
Yeah.
And so, like, you're right. I mean, the Bible is unapologetic, but what it's showing us is the relationship gives us context. The cross, Jesus willing to die on the cross for us, gives us context that there has to be a redemptive side to it because nothing else makes sense. And this is the promise of God. So even leading off of that, there are some that I would refer to as the hyper faith movement. And I know you kind of posed this question when we talked about this. The hyper faith movement would actually put the responsibility on the person, and they would say, you're not healed. You don't have the answer to your prayer because you don't have enough faith.
Right.
That's probably one of my, I think, one of the doctrines I hate the most.
Sure.
Because I think it's unbiblical and it's done so much damage. But can you speak to that for a moment? Why is that such a stupid, unbiblical doctrine?
Sure. When you look at the way that Jesus describes faith, and the idea that we get behind that movement is you don't have enough faith. And so while I was thinking about this message, I was wrestling through this, like, what is the amount of faith that it takes to have Jairus' daughter healed? What is the amount of faith that it takes to have this impossible situation nobody else could fix, fixed for this woman? Yeah. And it's not about the amount. Every time Jesus teaches about faith, he is always decreasing the amount.
Right, like the mustard seed.
Yeah, like he uses like the mustard seed. Like he's decreasing the amount that we would think it would take.
He literally picked the smallest thing as the example for them.
Yeah.
He said, like, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, be moved.
Yeah.
Like he's just saying you can do supernatural things. So like in our culture, we'd say, we'd grab a piece of sand.
Yeah.
Right. And we'd go, if you have faith at that size.
Yeah.
So he wasn't trying to say big faith because he could have said, if you have faith the size of the mountain, you can do these things, right?
Yeah. And so it's not about the amount of faith that we have. It's where our faith is pointed.
Yeah.
And so like even the places where, because a couple stories before, Jesus calms the storm for the disciples, and Jesus tells them, you of little faith. And the point behind that is not that they didn't have enough faith to stop the storm. It's that they forgot where their faith was found. Yeah. And so they stopped remembering that Jesus was present with them. Yeah. They stopped seeking Jesus. You know what I'm saying? Like like they're
yeah. And Jesus not being able to do miracles in his own town because of their lack of faith, but they didn't have little faith. They had no faith. They had rebellious faith. Yeah. They had rejected him.
Yeah.
Because I've heard people try to quote that. They'll say, well, you know, they didn't have faith. I'm like, yeah, they didn't have belief.
Yeah.
They had no faith, zero faith. So that would be a hindrance if you had zero faith. But a person who prays has at least mustard seed faith, right?
Yeah.
Because they're going to God and they're asking of God.
Yeah. And so like in my mind, doubt, frustration, confusion as to the things that God is doing, I don't think that puts faith off the table for you. Like, I don't think that's a lack of faith. If you continue to bring those things to Jesus.
Okay, yeah, say that again.
So
that's a great point. I mean, because I think people think like it's either faith and it's like this unwavering faith, or it's not faith because I have doubt. And you're like, no, that's not shown in Scripture.
Yeah, yeah. There are a lot of scriptural stories where people are confused by the thing that God is doing. The story I used at the very beginning of Moses, where God makes this declaration, that's a reminder because Moses is like, what the heck are you doing? You called me here to release these people, and now they're worse off because I stood up and did what you told me to do. And so like Moses is confused. He's like, what in the heck are you doing? And so, but God meets him in that moment. And so he took his confusion, his frustration, his struggle, his doubt, he took that to God, believing and hoping that God would have an answer for him. And God meets him in that space. And so as we struggle with confusion, with doubt, that doesn't mean that we lack faith. When we stop going to God, that's when we lack faith. When we are rebellious and we say, God can't do for me what he can't provide for me. Right. And this, I'm reading through the Minor Prophets right now, so it's a whole lot of fun, let me tell you. But this is the story of the prophets, is you have decided to stop seeking after God for the things that you need. You've gone to all these other nations and you've created alliances and you've given yourself to their gods, and you've enmeshed yourself with these people that do not allow you to depend on me. You've stopped seeking me. Mm-hmm. And so the relationship is in a strained situation at that point. You know what I mean? And so like it is in the seeking of Jesus. Jairus saw his need, and then he took his need to the one who he thought could fix it. And so that's our call always is we see our need and we keep going back to God with it. And when he meets us in that place and says no, it's not that we're not confused. It's not that it doesn't hurt, but it's that we keep coming back and going, okay, God, help me to understand this. Yeah. Okay, God, help me to trust that in this moment you're still here. Okay, God, help me to continue to do this and to walk where I keep seeking you and keep bringing my need to you. Yeah.
All right, final question. I'm going back to the risk. Okay. So in the beginning, I talked about it. So you had a moment, and I could be wrong on this, but you had a moment that all of us as communicators have where you say something, and then as you say it, you realize it might be taken the wrong way, and you kind of want to correct it, but you don't have time to correct it. Like, this is what it felt like to me today when you talked about risk in the sermon, and this is what I mean by it. You say something along the lines of, you just have to take the risk to follow God, and you go, well, it's not really a risk, but it's a risk. Yeah. Like you did something like that, and I laughed because I was like, yes, I know the tension you're talking about it is a risk in the sense of the vulnerability. You're like, you even said, I mean, you made the point, like you want God to help you in your finances, tithe and give offerings. Yeah. Like, that's so counterintuitive. Like you want God to meet you in your marriage, then like love your spouse and forgive your spouse. And you're like, wait, what? Like those are the rhythms. So like on one side there's a risk, but it's such a guaranteed result that it's not really a risk, but it is a risk. Okay. Yeah. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. 100%. Am I correct that as you were saying it, you're like, I want to acknowledge it. So I wanted you to speak to that because I thought like, I felt that tension, and I'm sure other people feel the tension of like, is it a risk? Is it not a risk? So just speak to that for a moment.
So I think the reason why we doubt God, why Adam and Eve doubted God, why it's natural for human beings to doubt God is because God doesn't answer always the way that we expect. And so for us to entrust ourselves to God is risky from our perspective because our hearts are tied to the result, not necessarily to just being, you know what I'm saying? Like, our expectation is like, if I don't have this one thing, like I won't be okay. If I don't have the money in this moment, like I'm not going to be okay. If I don't have that job, that career, if I don't get that promotion, like I'm not going to be okay. Like, so God, if you don't provide that for me, like, can I trust you in this? Because you might say no. So that's risky to us. You know what I mean? Yeah. But if our perspective is like, no matter what happens here, if I bring this need to you and I entrust it to you, like, it's not any less vulnerable for us, but it's not a risk. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is like God is guaranteed to come through for us, and He's promised to always provide for us. That's not always the way we expect. It's not always the way that we want, but He's always faithful in coming through on His promises. So in that sense, it's not risky. And I think the more we allow ourselves to get to that vulnerable place, and the more we allow ourselves to get to where we take those steps of faith, and I think that's the terminology that we typically use, where we're taking those steps of faith where it feels scary for us, where it feels like unknown to us, the more opportunities we have to see that God is faithful and that He does come through, even when it's not exactly how we expect it.
Yeah. You talked about reading through the minor prophets, and you could read through the major ones too. the dynamic of that is oftentimes people can read those books and it can almost feel like God is harsh in that because it's such extreme language. It's language of rebuke. And so that oftentimes paints an image of God, maybe that he's angry. But I read them as really this loving God, because on one side, you do have the dynamic of people who have basically committed spiritual adultery on God. They're worshiping and connecting themselves to other gods. And the fact that he's still there, rebuking them, challenging them, is him saying, I'm still committed to the covenant. I'm still committed to the relationship. And he's always one turn away, in the sense of you turn from your sin and he welcomes you back. There's grace, and not grace for like, hey, I'll accept you back, but we'll never be the same. It's total restorative grace. I love you. I forgive you. I accept you. I welcome you back. And that's such a beautiful image that that's who God is. He's committed to us. And so there is that rhythm in our lives, like always turn to him. Always turn to him in any situation. He's always there. And no, he is committed relation. I mean, that's where we began today, was the covenant relationship. He's so committed to you. He's more committed to you than you can ever imagine. And so like when you realize that, you will run to him when you need grace because of sin. You will run to him in desperation, like the stories that you share. You'll run to him in celebration when things are going well. Amen. But you have to understand that covenant relationship of how much he loves you.
Yeah, and I think that's where, like, as I think about my life, there are a lot of things where there's a lot of questions I have. Like, I don't understand. There's so much about God I don't understand, and I can't put my finger on. But all I know is the context of the relationship that I have with God, the context that I see of the relationship that I see him, even in those moments when he's disciplining Israel, like his heart and his posture. And so like my entire life, despite the confusion, it has been shaped around this idea that God is that. And so I can't fathom or imagine, though I still don't understand everything fully, I can't fathom and imagine God outside of that context. And so I think it allows for a lot of like what we see in the Old Testament, but at the same time, I still have questions about a lot of it. You know what I mean? But it is that like this God's posture towards us creates the context for our flourishing in life. And it's when we can bite into that and begin to entrust ourselves to God that he will come through for us. That's when I think we really start to find the life that God has intended for us all along.
Yeah, that's good. You got anything else?
I don't.
Well, Chris, once again, sermon on Sunday was awesome.
Oh, thank you.
I'm always thankful to be able to hear your teaching, to learn, to grow. I'm thankful that our church gets to experience it. And thank you again for your vulnerability. I think that's one of the things that connects our church most to you and to us as teachers is they see real people struggling in life, but also finding victory. So really appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you joining this podcast. It means a lot to us. It's not lost on us that you could be watching anything else. And so the fact that you connect really touches our hearts. And we pray that this is an encouragement to you. And if it is, we genuinely ask that you will like, subscribe, and share with people, because that helps this become more popular, not for our own ego, but because we think the truth, it changes people's lives. And so we want to get this out to as many people as possible. So we love you. We're proud of you. And we can't wait to see you on Sunday. God bless.